All right, this is Marty Wilson speaking. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association with Mr. Richard Lesh. It's August 16th, 2022, and Brian's sitting in the room with us. But we're here to talk to Rich because Rich has a fascinating memory, and he's lived in Monroe County for a lot of his life. He's lived in a lot of parts of Monroe County. So Rich, as I always do, let's start with where and when you were born, the names of your parents, and then let's follow your story.
I was born in East Stroudsburg, the General Hospital. And the General Hospital back in those days was a boarding house. Big white house with a big porch on the front. And if you stood in front of it and looked at it today, to the left side was a yard and lawn and a field all the way down to the street.
What year was this?
Nothing else there. To the right side where the college is today, that was woods. That was all field. There was nothing there. Mm-hmm. Now that was that way up until, I want to say, 1949.
So what year were you born?
Hmm?
What year were you born?
I was born in 1938. They tell me 37, but I go for 38. 1938, January the 27th. I'm older than dirt, but you're plumbing my memories, and you're plumbing the history of the county that I know. And I went to every school in this county except three. The three I didn't go to was what they called the lab school, which was over at the college area, and the two here in Stroudsburg, which was Mooring and Ramsey. I did go to Stroudsburg High School for 1 month, but I went to every school in this county, and I went to several churches in this county. I've gone to Analomink, I've gone to Middle Smithfield, I've gone to Smithfield, I've gone a lot of my time in Delaware Water Gap, I've gone to East Stroudsburg. I have never been with a class long enough to call it a class. The longest I've ever been with any kids that were in my class was probably 3 years, and that was from 7th, 8th, and 9th, and that was at J.M. Hill School in East Stroudsburg. I've also gone to school in Philadelphia. I lived in Philadelphia back during the war years. So when I went to Philadelphia, they sent me back a grade, so I lost a grade there. So instead of being in first grade, I was in kindergarten. What do I know? But I was what you might call white trash then, because I lived with the black community at the time, which was fantastic in my opinion. There was nothing wrong to that. So my family was what I like to look at, and they call me today, is vagabonds. They go from one place to the other. I always thought there was one step ahead of the bill collectors. So I have moved all over this county, and many times in the same area, several times. My first recollection, I remember when I was 2 years old. Now, this was down in Jersey, and my dad was trying to teach my mother to drive a car, a Model T. Well, she didn't do too well. She ran through the back of the barn. Of course, he gave her the devil. And I'm a 2-year-old kid. And back in those days, when you had a glass bottle, and you had a rubber nubble on it and a nibble, we used to call that a tit bottle. And I had that in my mouth, and I'm running down the hill, and I fell. And when I fell, it broke, cut my wrist right here, still scarred. I've had that forever. Now, I tell people when they say they can't remember things, and they'll question my memory. And I've gone in a lot of debates and a lot of different arguments when somebody will say, well, it was this way, and I say, no, it wasn't that way. I was there. It was this way. And they'll say, no. I say, yeah. Because you leave out the little nuances. You do not fill out the whole picture. You're only leaving parts of the picture that you remember. You must present the whole picture, not just parts of it.
Yeah.
Now, in order to do that, whatever you remember, whether it's a structure or whether some catastrophic things there, you remember that because it's imprinted on your mind. You may not remember it all forever, but sometime down the road it'll come back to you. But you also got to remember the people that were there at the time. My forte, and a lot of times, is I remember the people's names. So I can quote names to you that you people would probably say, well, I remember them, but I never heard of them. So my memory is set, and I said before, it's like an album in my head. I can turn a page wherever I want to be, and I can look at that. And I can see things like a frog sitting on a wall that nobody else saw. And they'll say, well, how do you know it's there? Oh, I say, because it's there. It's there. It's there in my head. It's a painted picture. Don't ask me how this come about, because I'm not a very pious man, so I had to beat him in upstairs. But the thing of it is, when you get this into your memory dialogue, it's always there and it's always prompting you to remember that precise time at that precise area. Many people disregard that. They don't accept it, they don't catalog it, and it just goes by their mind. I've heard so many people say, oh, I can't remember what happened last week, or I can't remember what happened today. Well, I can go back eons, and they can be documented. If somebody wants to question my memory, they can go back and document. I can show you places that are there today.
Well, let's take advantage of that memory. What are your first memories of Monroe County?
My first memory of Monroe County, when I lived in, I was, after we come, I was shuffled from person to person to person. But I was living with my mother, and we lived on what we call the Day Street Flats. There was a dirt road behind what was called Bogart's Bar, down off of Burrow Street. We lived in a shack back there. I lived with her and her sister who was dying, my aunt, Anna, and her husband, Groover Counter. Now I remember this vividly because I'm 3 years old, I had bib overalls on, it's wintertime. I went out to play in the snow and I got soaking wet. Now this guy, Groover Counterman, was a nasty guy. I came in, there was a cherry red stove. Back in the days when your stoves get red cherry, you can see the outline, it's all cherry red. You know, put your hand on your burn. He made me stand behind the stove till my pants got dry and it's burnt my leg. Anyway, I went in and I talked to my aunt, she called me in, and she had a goiter on the back behind her ear where you could look in and see the maggots. And she was telling me, she said, son, you be a good boy. And then she died. My first case of somebody dying, I'm 3. So my mother picked up and went with her husband, and he fathered a child. I got a brother someplace I don't even know. But anyway, we then moved from there to Gargone's Bakery on Cortlandt Street, North Cortlandt Street. And right straight across from Gargone's was a ice cream stand called Mary Jane's. Right next to that was the house that Shirley Swartz. She became a drum majorette in school, and she later on had her own little, where she would teach all the kids. She marched through town, that's one of the drum Schwartz's majorettes when she's teaching it. I remember that because I would come out and sit on the wall, and back in those days, the town always had a parade. I don't know why, just for a parade. I would sit on the wall and watch the East Stroudsburg High School band march down Cortlandt Street on a Saturday. And I would sit there and watch, and I watched the drum majorettes. There was many of them at that time. There was Shirley Arntz, there was Shirley Schwartz, and they were there. Also at Gargone's during the war years, which I remember them vividly. During the war years, everybody had to be in at 8 o'clock. There was curfew. The CD guys would walk down the middle of the street with a flashlight, and every house had to be darkened with a black shade. And that was gospel. And I would sit and watch these guys walk down the street at night, 8 o'clock. And then we had the largest and tallest buildings in the county, which probably was the courthouse, one of them, where they had plane watchers. They call them plane spotters. And they had books. I used to have one. They had a book of every Japanese, every German aircraft. And they had to memorize it. And I had a book like that, and I was memorizing it just for the heck of it. I'm 4 years old now, 3. I started school in East Stroudsburg. I was 5. I used to walk up to what was now, it's a bar, but it used to be Lance's bookstore. Well, Lance is right there in the corner. I'd walk across the street, the guy would give me, and then I'd go into East Stroudsburg to the school. I was only in there for probably a month or 2. And then my mother discarded me. She went someplace where she had this child by this counterman. And then I got shuffled up to my grandfather. Now, my grandfather lived right on the corner of the Seabaum Farm. Today you look at Seabaum Farm, and if you look across the field, it's all cars. In my day, it was all cornfield. And my grandfather lived in a tar paper shack there. There was 2 of them. There was a shack right there, and then up beyond that, up towards the hill, and to the right was another shack. There's an old man lived in there. He used to scare me to death. And off down from that was another building, which was the Schooner Inn, which was a bar. Now, when I lived in a shack with my granddad, we would go in. He was good friends with C-Bomb. And we'd go up to C-Bomb's. It was a big old hill. I remember that because my legs didn't go as fast as my granddad's. And he'd take me up to the barn. And we'd look at the mules. They had mules up there, chickens all over the place, and horses and that. And it was all cornfield. And C-Bomb always told my granddad, you go pick out all the corn you want, have fun, take it out. And my granddad and I go pick the corn. We ate corn raw right off the stalks. We didn't cook it. And we always went in there and got groundhogs. We always kept the groundhogs clean from that field. My grandfather, he was a half-breed American Indian. Now, don't ask me why, but he was a big man. And he would go in there, and he had an old rusty .22 rifle because they had no firing pin. He had a rusty nail, and he had a rubber band. And then we'd go into the field, and he'd stand there, and he'd whistle. And the next thing you know, the groundhog stands straight up. And he'd say to me, son, that's a whistle pig. He said, you whistle, they stop, and they stand up to listen. And that's when I shoot him. Huh. And he did that, and he whistled, that groundhog stood up. He, big as that, my granddad took his rifle and pulled the rubber band back, and he shot the groundhog. I went to get the groundhog. When I ran after the groundhog was wounded badly. And my grandfather chased me. I'll never forget that. And I'm reaching down for this groundhog. My grandfather knocked me over and I rolled over. And he gave me the devil. He said, that groundhog, take your hands off. So we shot him again. And then we prepared him that night. And the next night we had him for supper. But that's how we lived. We lived off the land. My grandfather would then go across and set eel traps across the broadhead, which was illegal. And back in those days, the railroad trains would always come up and stop right there. They always had to stop, and there was lines of cars. And they'd wait for the gravel pit roundhouse to bring a pusher out. And they'd sit there. My grandfather knew most everybody in the railroad. And he'd talk to the engineers. And we'd walk the tracks, pick up the coal that was falling. There was a railroad cop named Larison. In later years, I worked with his son. But he was the railroad officer on the railroad. And he knew my granddad. My granddad didn't have any money. He didn't have nothing. But every once in a while, he would kick out a coal car, and he'd open up the hopper, and the coal would fall out on the line of the track. And then when the train left, my granddad and I would over pick it up and put it back. And that's, now, during the day, we used slide wood to heat the house in the wintertime. And at night, he'd bank it with coal. Now, we went up to Bates Sawmill, and my granddad, him. We went up and we got C-Bomb's wagon and 2 mules, lop-eared, cantankerous mules. I'm 5, I guess, 5, 6 years old at the time. I'm going to the Analomink school. Mrs. Bates was my teacher. So we get in this wagon and we're going up to Bates Sawmill to pick up the slide wood so we can bring it back. Now, I'll never forget, my granddad, he was kind of a philosopher. He was not illiterate, but he could just sign his name, what have you. He didn't get anything. Anyway, I remember I was sitting there, and those mules, as a little kid, they kind of scared me a little bit. And I'm sitting on this bench, and one mule, I'll never forget, turned his head towards this other mule and was trying to nip its ear. And I said to my granddad, now, why is he doing that? My granddad said, well, son, the one's a Republican, the other's a Democrat, and they don't like each other. I never forgot that. So then we went up to Bates, we got the wood, brought it back, and I threw a tantrum for something. Don't ask me why. One of the philosophies I've learned a long time, he dragged me into the woods. He said, get down on your belly and dig a hole. I get down on my belly and I'm digging this hole. Stretch out my hands. I thought he was going to bury me. He said, now you get all that out of your system in that hole. He says, we're going to bury it, and we're going to leave it here, and we're going back. We're done. That's the philosophy that many people should use today. Go find yourself a hole, get all the nonsense out of your system, bury it in the hole, and walk out of the woods and leave it. And that's how I was.
You did not mention your parents' name or your grandfather's
My parents' name, my mother's name was Josephine, and my father's name was Daniel. Now, the strange thing about my mother, which is in my book that I wrote, which is kind of strange. I don't know my father's birthday. I don't even know how old he is. He's gone now. But my mother's birthday was April the 26th, 1917. And my wife's birthday was April the 26th.
How about that?
It's a weird time. The story of my wife was the divine revelation, which is in my book, which today, 66 years later, I can't reconcile myself. And I'm a very analytical person. So from that point, my grandfather then, I'll never forget, we brought this, I'll tell you what, I recall a lot. Right across Broadhead, over on, well, whatever that, 447, 449, was Percy Crawford's Pine Brook. My dad knew Percy Crawford, and we would go over there, and they had a pond over there, like a place where they had a beach where they could swim. Now the buildings wasn't like it is today, no. But when you come, there was, I think, 3 bridges, 2, 3 bridges. Anyway, when you come up back on the left-hand side, when you cross the bridge, up towards the railroad tracks, towards Analomink, on that left side was Camp David back then. And Camp David didn't have any wooden buildings at that particular time. They had tents. And later on, I guess they got buildings. But across the street from Percy's entrance was all fields. Fields here, woods here, and a single dirt road. You went down this dirt road with the trees over, and you went all the way to the creek. Just before you get to the creek was a dump, a huge dump. My granddad would always go over there with me, towing me, and pick the dump. I was a dump picker. I picked dumps all over the place. And we would get clothes, shoes, toys. I'll never forget, when I went there, I found a rocking horse without any rockers. Well, I drug that horse all the way back across and over to that shack, and that was my pride and joy. I sit that there and I'm riding this horse. So my granddad, which was in my first book, we brought the slab wood back, and he used to double bit axe. Later years, when I was 10 years old, living with my dad and mother down at Water Gap, I used to do the same thing, split wood with a double blade axe, and they always scared me. I didn't like a double blade, because he'd swing that back and thinking it's gonna catch me. Well, lo and behold, what happened, when my grandpa was splitting a slab wood, it broke, and the axe came down and cut his leg. Back in them days, he didn't have no money, no doctors. There was doctors that used to travel to house. They would make house calls. But we had no phones, and we're far from town. So he bandaged it up himself, and lo and behold, it got gangrene. And I want to say I was 8 maybe, 8 years old, 9. I'm holding his hand, and he died in my died. He said to me, which is my first book, "Never fear, son, I'll always be near." And which is a weird feeling for a kid. Every incident I've ever been in, every incident in my life, I've been on fire, I've been in hurricanes, I've always been the third party, not involved in what's going on. I've told people, panic can kill you, can exacerbate every situation you're into. It can make it worse than what it really is. Every incident I've ever been in, I was the third party looking at the incident, assessing it, and then reacting to it. When I'm on fire aboard ship, there's no place to put the fire out. Remember that? Everybody's panicking. I look down, my whole leg's on fire, big bubbles coming up, and I'm dying. I said to myself, in nobody in particular, I just said, I'm on fire. Put the fire out myself. No panic, no pain, no jumping around, just reaction. And everything I've ever done, I've been in reaction. And a lot of times, some of this stuff, you humble. I've had a 12-year-old girl die in my arms. Nothing I can do. The last person ever hold her, a stranger. She broke her neck. Nothing I can do about that. So from my grandfather, when he died, my parents came back, and they hauled me back. I think we went down to Philadelphia, and we lived in Philadelphia for 2 or 3 months during the war years, and then we came back home again. And now they were split up. I never knew whatever one was there, but I was always with my mother, I guess. So when we came back, we moved. My mother, he left. My dad, I don't know where he went. going back to my grandfather, we used to walk the track all the way down to gravel place, which was the roundhouse. I can remember sitting on that train, scared me to death, as they operated that roundhouse. That roundhouse was still in operation. The crossing was a single shed with a guy with one arm, and he'd come out with a red lantern or a green lantern, and that's how he worked it. But the travel, that was the old WBRE, which went across back behind which is now the waterworks off of Stokes Mill Road, and it would take you to what we used to call the Cribbin, Stroudsburg called the Big Bend. And it would make a big bend, and that's where the tracks went across. Back in my day, off of Roller Street, which was down on the flats, you could see the pilings of where it used to carry the tracks. We used to climb them pilings and jump off and swim. But that was the WBR&E, which then came behind the old ShopRite and the Jubilee Station, which then went across behind the lumberyard and went across over and made the turn where 80 is today. In my day, that was just all tracks and bed. There was no cars there. VFW used to hold their carnivals underneath the 7th Street Bridge. But then you go on out and you come to the old WBRE Railroad Yards, which was Katz's Junkyard. And then when you went on out that, you would go on up past, it would swing up what was then like on a trail, and that would go up through Tannersville, which then would swing back underneath Camelback Mountain. When I was a kid living in Tannersville, I walked the track under the Camelback. When I was a kid living in Water Gap, I walked the bed going across the river and the bridge that went across by the paper mill. When I was a kid also, I walked the trolley tracks, which gone. Up on the top of the trolley tracks was the foundation of what was called the Dewdrop Inn. And that was also a park. There was a park there. There was a hot dog stand there. It was there when I was a kid. Today it's grown up, you can't even find the place. But that was the water gap issue. Now we go back to, I come out of Analomink, my grandfather died, and I got shifted with my mother, and then she wound up back down on flats again, down on what was Park Avenue. So not Park Avenue, Park Street. So Roller Street and Park Street with another shack. I was in there and I kept the house going. If it was 17 degrees outside, it was 17 degrees inside. That's how it always was. Everything was frozen. We had no amenities. I studied all my life just about by kerosene lamp or candles. But anyway, just slightly going back to my granddad and the Percy Crawford thing. On Saturday nights, we could hear the music from Percy Crawford. And my granddad found a radio with them days, the old batteries were made with paper and they would leak acid. Somehow he got this radio working. And he would listen about, I think it was 8:30, 9 o'clock, WVPO, and he'd hear Crawford. And then the WVPO radio station was on Main Street, right just below Penny's. We went upstairs, and that's where we went into the studio. That was WVPO. And they had two singing cowboys there. They had Tex Ryan, they had Slim Heller. They were the singing cowboys. And they had, I think it was, one of the announcers was Bryden Taylor, one of the announcers, as I recall. But that was my grandfather. Now we're out of the grandfather, and now we're back to down on the flats. And then my mother moved out of there and moved into Silverman's, over top of Silverman's store. Now I'm 13, I guess. The first job I ever had in my life was the Plaza Theater. The biggest thing in my life was my work ethic. If my dad never gave me anything, he gave me a work ethic. Because he never, even when he was broken ribs or drunk or had a coot, he never ever missed a job, never missed work. So I guess that's what he handed down to me. I never always worked better than the next guy. Not to make the next guy look bad, make myself feel good. I was with a friend of mine. We were going to go to the Plaza, which was a double feature on a Saturday. Mike Rikowski was the manager at the time. Joe Dorensis was the guy that ran the movie reels. I was 13. I bought a ticket. The girl gave me a ticket for $12, which was 20 cents, I guess. I gave it to Mike, and he looked at me and he says, "You're not 12 years old." I'm 6'1" almost then at that time. I'm skin and bones. And I said, "You caught me." I said, "No, I'm 13. He said, "Do you want to go to these movies?" I Yeah. He said, you want a job? Sure. So forever, I spent 7 days a week in the Plaza Theater, the Grand, and the Sherman. I've seen just about every movie that ever came to town. I had free passes to the Grand, free passes to the Sherman, and I got paid $1 a day for cleaning up after this. And I would go up and sit with Joe DeRensis in the projector's building and watch him do his thing, and we watched the movies. And that's where I started. And then from that, and the funny part about your working habit, and I've told many people, I even told my kids, your work habits is the prelude for your name. They push your name forward. You've got good work habits, you've got a good name. You've got bad work habits, you've got a bad name. These habits will open many, many doors to you which you don't even understand or realize. And all my life, there's always been a door open. When I worked at Plaza, I did that for quite a while, and then the next thing you know, I get Silverman's wants me to work for them. When you work for the Jewish people, you work. I mean, I've worked 8, 9 hours all day long for $1. I mean, I've cleaned out 40 feet of garbage just for $1. But the point with the Jewish people, they're clannish, so to speak, but if they like you, they'll open doors for you. I worked one summer for Silver Waters across from Smithfield School. That was all field then. Today it's got stuff there. But there's a huge road to go back in there. I was a boat boy. I go back in there, Silver Waters Landing. He paid me $15 a week, and I would take the tourists around the island on a tour, and then canoes were made of wood and they were heavy, you know, not like today. And I would take the tourists from Copacabana and take them all the way up to what was Buckwood or now Smith, and come down on the good side. I wouldn't take them down too far because they couldn't paddle back upstream. And back in those days, the river was much wider and much not as deep. There was many shoals. And a lot of times, if you get into the Water Gap, which is a different ballgame. So anyway, in that particular area, I got ahead of myself. I got in East Stroudsburg before I got to Water Gap. Before we came to East Stroudsburg, I had spent most of my childhood, a lot of my childhood, at Water Gap. I graduated from the Dutot Museum today, which was the first, my first teacher in there was a man. He was only there about 1 year, and then the woman came, Rhoda George came. She was the woman that took over as a principal. And in them days, it was like the old house on the ferry, the front, where the kids would sit in one row, then they take you up front, sit on a bench and teach you. And that's how it was when I went to the Gap.
How were the school rooms laid out? Where was first grade, second? You've been in the building.
Second grade was upstairs. First grade was up there where if you go up the steps and go to the right, Miss Marshall had second grade up in there. And the one room in the front there, where you got a lot of stuff, that was first grade. Downstairs it was 5th, 6th, and 7th, or 4th, 5th, 6th. And there were rows. There wasn't that many of us kids. So when I went there, I was in the 6th grade. I was in 5th and 6th grade. But my desk was right next to a wall. When you walk in there today, which has completely changed from my time, you make the left, over on the wall was a line of books, encyclopedias. And that's strange too to me, because I believe a lot of omens. All my life there's been omens. Omens is a gut feeling. You can call me anything you like. But when I went to that school, my desk was exactly in perfect line with the encyclopedia, electricity on the spine. I remember spelling that constantly. I don't know why, but it was right next to me. When I joined the Navy, I took the aptitude test. I wanted to be a gunnersman. No, we're going to send you to electric school. I don't want to be an electrician. That's where we're going. Now I'm an electrician. That omen, that encyclopedia, that word electricity had to become, somewhere along the line there had to be a connection. That's what I want. I've been an electrician all my life. And I've tried to get away from that. I've stepped off that path of life, I came back on again. I stepped off and come back on again. I was a policeman. I worked in the post office. I worked 2 jobs. I worked full-time police office, full-time post office. 40 hours a week in one, 40 hours a week in the other. But I've always come back to electricity. And I don't know why. I couldn't stay in the post office, drive me crazy. I hated food. I would play at night, my wife would wake me up because my hand's still going, I'm throwing mail. Back in those days, you didn't have zip code. You had to learn 3,600 offices in the state of Pennsylvania. And there were different sections. And you had to learn every name. Like you go out in Lancaster, you had to learn Blue Ball, Intercourse, Conestoga Wagon. You had to know where you're at. And then you're throwing this mail. If you make a mistake and it goes to the wrong office, they'll send it back. And they'll give you a gig, and you get that against you, you get time off, or you get penalty. And that's how it was in post office. You could only miss one or two before they accepted it. Then again, the trains are running. You could throw your raw mail on the RPOs, because then you could do that. I've done that. I worked in the post office from 1 o'clock in the morning until 8 or 9, usually. And I worked the word mail, I worked the trains, I worked the RPOs, which is now no longer. But it was driving me crazy. I had a good job, I had good money, and I had good benefits. I had 6 weeks vacation. All my military time counted there. So I could have stayed there and been great, no big deal. But I would have been in a rubber room someplace. I got a call, which was unheard of, from a guy that was the manager of Metropolitan Edison, Bob Noggle. He said, Rich, your name came up. I said, I paid my electric bill. No, he said, I got a job for you. Are you interested? Now, and you get into a power company in this area, that's a closed shop. You almost have to be born in there. And especially, they would look at you like the East Stroudsburg or the Metropolitan Edison. You couldn't be a Catholic, so to speak. You had to belong to the Masons. That was part of their forte. I said, where did you come up with this idea that I was even interested in the job? And besides, that's electricity again. He said, well, you've come highly recommended. He said, I'm offering you a job. I said, well, where's it at? He said, well, you have to start at Portland Plant, which is a coal mine. I've been there. You walk down there where that coal belt is, and you're walking into a mine. And I had to ask him. I said, no, I don't want your job, which is unheard of. Guys would give me hell, and they said, you turned down a job in the power company? I said, yeah, I didn't want it. A month later, I get another call from Bob. He said, Rich, he said, I got a job up here. It's an entry-level job. He says, it's a bee worker. He said, but if you want it, you can have it. So I took the job. And for 30 years, I worked in that power. Bless his heart. He stayed with me, and he gave me a great career.
And it goes back to the Tuto Museum, or the school, and that book of electricity.
That's right. It all goes back to that book, and I don't understand this today. And I tried to avoid this. You can't believe how many times I tried to walk off this path of life. I tell people, you're born with a blank page. Everybody is born with a blank page. The first people that write on that page is your parents. They're either going to make you a history professor, or they're going to make you a Catholic, or they're going to make you a Democrat, whatever, they're going to write on your page. And this is where your protocol is, and this is your path, this is your start. I was born with a blank page, but nobody wrote on it. Nobody wrote on my page. I wrote on my own page. I had to write my own way as I went. And I tell people, churches, again, I'm not a very pious person, but I can tell you for a bona fide fact, no questions asked, there is a supreme being. Now, life after death, I don't believe that. There might be, in my mind, there's 2 aspects of your life, your brain and your mind. When I was in isolation and dying because of a staph infection, because of the burn, I had come in, they told me I was dying, there's nothing I could do for me. 13 or 14 days, I'm in a room by myself. There is nothing in that room, so you can count the damn holes on the ceiling. But your mind, the mind will drive you crazy because it wants to play games. I had to fight this mind. I created games. Even to this day, I'll do games. I created word games. You take a 4-letter word and see how many words you can make out of 4 letters in so much time, and how many points you get for doing that. And if you can find an extra one, you get extra points. I've done that. I even do it today when I'm bored. But your mind is only, your brain is the mechanical part of your body. Everything just about that's mechanically made today comes from your body. Your crane, this is your crane. Your hooks, this is what you grab. Everything is compromised or part of the system of your body. Your brain, however, is the operating part. The mechanical part is the brain, the mind is the operating part. And if you can tie the 2 together, you're a good man. But if we could use just one more tenth of our brain. I could open that door if I just say open the door. But your brain itself, and your mind itself will, it'll just drive you. I argued with my mind. I even tried to get out of my body a couple of times. I wanted to look down and see what's going on. I mean, I fought tooth and nail with this mind, constantly fighting with this. And I'm sure that people, prisoners, that like McCain and these guys were months and months in isolation, they fought with their brain. And that's what made them the people they were as they came out, because their brain, they knew more than the normal person. Not much that they know, but they knew that what the brain was trying to tell people. And people don't operate with their brain. Not half the time they don't. They just go. They're just most of them just go on battery power. I believe they don't think before they put their hand in the stove before it burns up. So
Well, can we get back to Water Gap?
so we go back now. Where did I go? I was back in the Water Gap. So when we moved to Water Gap, we lived on 3 different places in the Water Gap. We lived off of Oak Street. Oak Street today is completely gone, different. You go down Oak Street, make that big wide turn, and you go across the bridge they got there now, which will take you down into the railroad station. That wasn't there. When I lived back there, you make that turn, a dirt road, single lane dirt road, fields on both sides, woods on both sides here, fields over here, part of the castle inn. You went on down, there was a road, there's still a road there. You go down, that went to the Water Gap dump. Now you went down this dirt road and it ended at a bluff. Stop, no more. In front, the tree is still there. It's all chopped down, half of it, it's fallen apart. But behind that tree was the house that I lived in. And on the other side, when you walk down through the woods, you walk down to the dump, that's where the spring was. I used to carry water up there.
That's where you got your water for the house.
Yeah, that's where I carried water up there, pails of water up from that spring. It was a pipe in the side of the hill, and that's where you got it. And then there was a little footbridge kind. You walked across this bridge. The water went down along the dump side. You could walk across this little bridge and go into the dump. My dad, we had, I think I was 10. I had 3 puppies. I don't know where they came from. But one of them got carried away by a horned owl at night. Hit the side of the building about 11 o'clock at night. When I went out with flashlight, it was flying off big wings, had the puppy. The other 2 puppies were there. My dad didn't like dogs, didn't like that. On a Saturday, he made me take the dogs in a box down to the dump. I walked down to the dump. When I was a young kid, you didn't ask elders anything. You either did it or got your butt kicked. So I set the box down. The dogs jumped out. I walked away. The dogs followed. And as the dogs followed me, he shot both of them. Killed them. I went and picked the one up and it was bleeding. I tried to stop it bleeding. I had to bury the 2 of them. And that was my dad. And so I would go out to the end of this bluff, which now is a road, dead end. It was all rocks and a hill. And when the trains came in, they were still dumping, they were still in operation, passenger stuff. That engine would stop right about there between this little cut. And I would be about level high, and I would sit on that bluff and talk to the engineers. And the engineers would say, "How come you're not in school, kid?" And I'd say, "Any time to go to school." But I would talk to the engineers, just for that. But them old steam engines, they were something. But across on the other side of that was an old footbridge, which is gone now. That used to take you to Island Park. Now the trains, now today, if you go down there today, and it's completely obliterated because you can't see it, there was a team track, I call it a team track. You walk where you could drive a cart over top of that. You went over after that, and then it went down through the woods, a dirt road, and it came to the riverside, and across that river was Island Park. Now when they had the floods, all the boats from Shawnee just about, and up in the cabins where they had the rowboats would float down, get tore off there. And they wind up down there because on the other side of Island Park, just out in the middle of the river, was shoals, a lot of rocks, and they didn't go any further. So us kids would pretend they were scavengers. We'd get these rowboats. Well, they got a hole in the bottom. Take it up, turn it upside down, pound a nail on a rock, and another board on top of that, turn it upside down. That was our pirate ship. And we had one old silly oar that didn't work, and then we tie a bed sheet, and that's how we float around. I swear I ain't drowned. But I used to go over them shoals and pick the rocks and get the hellgrammites, put them in a can, and sell them to the fishermen. And I used to go across there, which is only about 30 feet long, I guess, because you could come down along the island and go across the island. Back in my day, the hobos was always on the island. They had tents in there, makeshift tents. But you could go across there, down through the woods, and come out on the other side facing the Copper Mine Road. There was a beach there, parts of it, but not as much as it used to be. I would go there and I'd swim across the river to the Copper Mine, which was kind of dumb, but I did it anyway. And then I'd swim back. That's what I did in there. I lived on the river and lived in the mountains. I would go down, but I had clothesline, a big old rock, one oar, by myself, and I'm going to go down, and I'm a pirate. And I went all the way down to the point of the gap, threw the rock out, which didn't help, too deep there. And you could look up and see the railroad tracks. And along the railroad bank, there was some foundations. When I was a kid, I don't know if they're there anymore, there had to be a building there, some kind of building. I don't know what it was. Anyway, I wanted, because there was train wrecks. One of the train, a couple times I had wrecked in there. So I had great set of lungs. I could hold my breath for probably 2 minutes or more. I would dive off the boat and go down and see if I could find a train. Well, the deep, that's cold water. You get down deeper, it's colder, and it's darker. You can't see it. You can grope around. And I come back, I never found the train. Well, I mean, they're there, but I didn't see it. I come back up. I couldn't get the rowboat back because you're going up the current. So I just tie it over to the side of the bank, and I climb up the bank and walk railroad tracks back. And I look for snakes. Usually a lot of copperheads. And I'd chase them, try to catch one. But they're pretty quick.
What would you do with a snake if you caught it?
I've caught a couple, put them in my pocket. Not a copperhead. What would I do with him? That's a good question. I don't know. Well, I've come pretty close catching. But anyway, I went back to the river. Now, back in those days, all right, we moved out of there, and we moved into the Castle Inn for a month. Now, Castle Inn was completely changed. The Castle Inn, where you go where the music hall was, which is kind of not like it is now. And if you go beyond that a little bit, it's all destroyed, destructive there. But if you went back that from that point of view and went straight back to where the dump was, they went back in there, and that was lawn. They had a cabana back there, they had tennis courts, and they had a little swimming pool, and they had shuffleboard. And that was behind the house I lived in. Now, it's not where the powerhouse is, because there's houses there. It's beyond that, which is the road. When the road came in, it cut down all the bank and did a lot of destruction there. But anyway, if you go down in there, past the Castle Inn, on the left-hand side, was the, was still in operation when I was a kid, was the Riverview. The Riverview had a pair of steps. It had steps that went down from the top, and they went all the way down behind, which was the Delaware House back in the day, which would later became the Hofbräu. Louise Bradley ran the Hofbräu. So when you come down them steps, there used to be a railing there, but they're not there anymore. But you can come down from the Riverview and walk down, and there's where Delaware Avenue, if you want to call it, would come down from Hauser's, come all the way down to where the bridge is today, make a big swing and look, come on back down, and go around in a big circle and go to the railroad station. There was a road there. That's not there today. You go there today and you can't see anything. I don't even think you can't even see part of where the Riverview House was. In my day, we could still see the steps. The railing was gone. The steps are there. And you're coming to the back side of the Hofbräu. Now, I lived in a Hofbräu. We moved to the Hofbräu, so I lived in a Hofbräu. Louise Bradley she was cool. She didn't have any kids. But every night about 5 o'clock, she had a television, black and white television. She always got the kids that lived in the Hofbräu, or in the neighborhood kids, wherever you want, set up chairs, have soda, and she put on the show Howdy Doody. And that's what she'd do in the bar.
Did a lot of families live at the Hofbräu?
Yeah. There was the bishops that lived in there. There was we lived in there. There was two, I want to say, there was these singers at one time lived in there. And right above that house was an apartment building. And there was another house next to that, and that was where the Smolaks lived. Denny Smolak lived there with his half brother, which was Doug Nichols. And then there was the next house up that was an apartment. And then the next house was the Barnes. The Barnes clan lived there. All the Barnes lived in there. Kenny Barnes, Butch Barnes, all them Barnes lived there.
So,
And then you went to the Bellevue. Then it's the Bellevue.
so just to get back to this point, so families, it wasn't used as a hotel anymore. It was a place.
Just family. Not in my time, just family.
Well,
But I understand that there were some guys I think that did rent a room in there, I'm sure, but not a hotel.
Where did you live in the Castle Inn? Just in one of the
I only lived there about a month, and I don't know why I was there. But you go up past the building we got here now on a corner, and then you went up to where the movie or the music center was. There's a big wide driveway, and we lived there in one of those apartments. And it was always cold because everything was tile.
Yeah.
And it's just something where they rent it for the tourists. And we only stayed in it. I don't know why we was transitional, but it was just myself and my mother for about a month.
So you're living in a room at the Bellevue, essentially. What used to be a hotel room, that's what you're living in.
At the
At the
Hofbrau.
Hofbrau, right?
It had it was a kitchen, 2-bedroom, a bath.
Oh, so it was an apartment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying there might have been some. She might have had some boarders there, but I didn't pay much attention. I was a kid.
Sure.
And there was the Rems that lived in there, the Gladys Rems, and they lived in there. And then the kids, we always played at the railroad station. We was always at the railroad station. And across the tracks was parts of the buildings left. Now, today, it's condensed. But in my time, it was wide. The river has always fluctuated and always changing. So it was eroding the banks out as you went. Same way with Kittatinny and all that stuff. Everything, and it compressed it. Because when I went across there's 2 tracks. And when I went across there was a mulberry grove where you can go along and pick the mulberries up and eat them. I used to get a handful and get a bellyache eating them. But then, like I say, you had that dirt road, which today you can't even find it. And it's all grown up. That took you to the Island Park. And the Island Park, I spent a lot of time there.
And that was still used by the public back then?
I don't know who used it, to be honest with you. I did. I'm sure the public did when they put a lot of guys would take their boat down and go fishing there.
Okay.
Because the park, the Island Park was, you go up the Jersey side, I call it Jersey side, go up to Shawnee and you come back around it and you come back down this little tributary, which is probably 30, 40 feet wide. And that's when you went to the Island Park. And again, the river keeps eroding everything, so it changes every day. You go down there today, it's completely changed from my time. It ain't there at all. And then you had the Cataract House, which I think was close to the Riverview. And the Hofbrau was the Delaware House. The Kittatinny was gone, naturally. What was there was the Delawana. Delawana was still operating when I was there. Deerhead, we called it Deerhead Inn. There was a building next to that, now it's a parking lot. A fellow used to, he had model airplanes in there. He used to make RC planes. Right across, Hausers was still operating. The Methodist Church, they had a Parsons there. There was a guy who lived there. He used to run the Doom Flip show. Now you pushed me into the Water Gap, but you failed to get the Stroudsburg and East Stroudsburg stores. But anyway, that's neither here. Anyway, and the Presbyterian Church was different. Presbyterian Church didn't look like it is today. Today it's been changed all the way around. I went to that church. In fact, I went to that church with your uncle. Now, there used to be the Green Lantern gift shop. That was run by John Okono. Okono was my scoutmaster, first one. John Wilson was the assistant. And he was a piece of work. But anyway, where the post office is today was a barn. Big red barn and a dirt road. And the dirt road went around the back of it used to be the firehouse. I guess it's this building, it's a commercial road. That dirt road would go back through the woods and up and come behind Mountain House. And they used to run things across there. And when you came across that from behind it, I don't think you can see it today, it would take you down across that Shepherd's Avenue and right into a dirt road that led up to the barn, big barn, and that's where we had our Boy Scouts meetings. And your uncle, knucklehead, what he would do with all these kids and it was his idea. We had one, I never forget, we had one single 30-watt bulb, I guess. He gave one kid a boxing glove, and he turned the lights out. And then he said, start swinging. Many times we got hit in the mouth. That was John's idea. Now, John's idea, too, he lived at the end of Shepherd's Avenue, which now you go through. Back in them days, it was dead end. You couldn't go. If you went to the left, you hit Mincy, the Mincy Hotel, and that later became the Hot Club, the second Hot Club. But that was the Mincy Trail. That was the operating. They had a croquet court out there, and that behind that was Wolf Hollow golf course, and above that was the St. Mark's Mission Church, or Mission. Mm-hmm. And down towards the end of Shepherd's Avenue was a dead end, and that's where your uncle lived. So for us to get merit badges one Saturday, he got us all out there to clear his land. We cut trees down, we cut brush down, we burned it up. And he kept saying, you guys are going to get a merit badge, you're going to get a merit badge. And, you know, I'm cutting trees. What am I getting a merit badge about? But that was your uncle. But that's only one of the few stories I know about him. And he kind of took care of me, so to speak. I didn't realize he did. He got me in a White camp for 3 weeks. I didn't have money to do that. And I think maybe it was his father ran the YMCA, or had something to do with YMCA. And the YMCA in East Stroudsburg was a big, big boarding house. That's all it was, a big front porch. And you go in there, there's all kinds of rooms and hiding places, and us kids would go up on the balcony, step on the balcony and watch the basketball game. But his father, who ran that, he also got me in one summer at Camp Hugh Beaver up in Bushkill. I don't know how I got into that, but they hauled me up there and said, "There, you're going to be up here for 2 weeks." I didn't pay for any of this stuff. So I'm in Camp Hugh Beaver, courtesy of the Wilson family. Now, Wilson, John was a Navy man, ex-Navy man. Years later now, John's working for telephone company. I'm working for power company. I was aboard his ship. He was aboard the USS Massachusetts, which is a battleship, which was in Fall River, Massachusetts. And I went aboard his ship. And he kept telling me, "Did you go here? Then there's this little spot down there. If you look behind here, you'll find this house." I said, "John, I ain't going there. I don't know where you're at." I said, I was in a wardrobe having supper. Wardrobe. But he always wanted to know about what I saw on his ship. You know, I said, I was just a visitor. But it was kind of funny. My history is very simple. I'm very proud of the fact that I conned the oldest ship in the Navy, the Constitution. I took it out in the middle of Boston Harbor, and I turned it around and brought it back and tied it back to the bay. In them days, you had to change the berthing so that the weather would weather evenly on both sides. Yeah. I never thought about that until years later, because I remember when I was a kid, they was going to scrap it. And they had a big thing going on back in the days. It had to be back in the 40s. Every kid in the county, every kid in the country sent a penny in because it was copper. And we wanted to save the old copper sign. And they did.
Well, that's a sailing ship.
That's right, 4-mast schooner. I took that out.
So under sail, you took it out?
I took it out into the bay, turned it around. I'm standing behind the wheel, turning this thing around, brought it around, put it back in, and tied it up again. I never thought about that until years later, as far as history is concerned, because it was just a job. And every job I took didn't really mean anything, just a job. I put it in the book. But I look back at it and I think to myself, you know, that's damn history. What kid, because I go back to when they was trying to save the ship with these pennies, what kid wouldn't want to stand where the last person standing on the wheel steering his ship? And I was also aboard Eisenhower's presidential yacht, the Sequoia. And we took him out in the middle of Narragansett Bay. We took him out in Martha's Vineyard. And there's a funny story about him too, because he was a short, bald-headed guy. And we're in line, don't ask me how I got on that, I don't know. Somebody upstairs pushed me around. But he came out and he said, he was at the War College, 1956, I think it was, 56, 57. Anyway, he said, he lined us up, there was six of it, I guess, all dressed blues. A lot of the Secret Service around. He said, "You kids are the future of this country." He said, "I want to tell you something." And it's one of his famous words. He said, "You have to be wearing of the civilian military complex is going to eat this country up. He said, you guys got to stop that. We went out to Martha's Vineyard. Now we're going about 10 knots maybe. You're getting a lot of weight behind. He said, do we have any sail twine? No, we got sail twine down. Sail twine. He was drinking a Coke bottle. A glass Coke bottle. Bought 12. You know, you're not supposed to talk to them, man. You're supposed to pay attention. He tied that damn bottle, empty, and he threw it off the back. Wake. And he got it, feeding it out. Now it's bouncing up and down. And he said, that's how my grandfather taught me to fish. And that was the President of the United States. And that was, I look back at that time, and I didn't pay much attention to that because I was a kid. I didn't realize the enormity of it, so to speak. You don't know this till you get older. And I've had my hand on a runaway reactor, that's history. You look at that and you say, all of a sudden I'm part of history. You're not only history, you're part of history.
Yeah.
So I'm blessed in that area being part of history. That
Well, can I push you back to Water Gap?
Water Gap was my stomping grounds. I would go in the woods in Water Gap, and I had a pet squirrel. That damn squirrel used to make me mad. I always carried a pocket full of Mary Jane's peanut candy. I lived on peanut butter candy. That's all I had, skin and bones. And I would get and that squirrel, red tail, would come over to me, stand in front of me, stand up and say, like to say, well, where's my share? I say, and I look at him and say, no, I'm 10, maybe 11. I'd hand him that. He'd grab that out of my hand and run away, and he'd stop and look back at me. And I said, you damn little bandit, you're supposed to share that. But he'd chatter and carry on. The strangest thing about the woods of my church, you go out into the woods, you can talk to the man upstairs all you like to. The animals are not going to chastise you. They're not going to find out who you are, what you're not. You're strictly who you are, and you've got nothing there. You're just you. And the animals tolerate you. You're in their domain. They're going to chatter and carry on, but they tolerate you. And if you get along with the animals, you can get along with almost anybody, because they don't judge you. People judge you, which is a terrible thing. And I don't do that.
Did you ever have a job in Delaware Water Gap? Did you ever work?
Yeah, the funny part about that job, you know what that job was? And you don't do it today, and I don't think you will. There was one time in the post office. The post office was where Castle Inn Garage was. You look at the Castle Inn Garage, straight up. You see the Castle Inn Garage in the middle. On the right-hand side was a soda shop, store, books, whatever. On the left side was the post office. And in those days, when you had special delivery, they had a special delivery boy.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. I didn't belong to the post office, but the only reason I got that job was there was a guy named Jim Howard who lived up what we call, right as you come off the trolley tracks down, there was a huge house back in the White House. And then off to the side of that was chicken coops, and we called that the chicken farm. And that's where Jimmy Howard lived. Jimmy was older than I, he knew me, and he got admitted, I think, to the Naval Academy, and he said to me, he said, we'll go down to the post office, he says, and you can take over my job delivering these telegrams and these different, so I would stop in the post office every once in a while, and if they had a special delivery someplace, I would go deliver it, and they'd pay me $1.
What do you remember about that big white house up there? What was that building?
Up underneath where Jimmy Howard lived?
Yeah.
It was just, to me, it was just a big old farmhouse, that's all. Now, you go back, I walked the tracks up there, back when the tracks were back up in there, as I told you, I think it was the Dewdrop Inn. And when you come back that plateau, actually the Dewdrop Inn, there was a dump behind that. I don't have my head examined because I was a kid, I used to go there and put Jim Beam bottles, liquor bottles, sitting on that foundation. Now, I don't think you can even see the foundation today, and I throw rocks at it. But there was a turnaround for the trolleys, and there was also a picnic grove. There was a place where the hot dogs stand. There was the inn. In my day, there was a rope hanging down from a tree. In my day, you could still see parts of the ties. Even once in a while, you'd run into a pole that's still left there. No tracks, no wires. But I would walk down, when you walked out across that plateau as it made its turn, you could go out on that plateau before it went out and made its downward thrust, and you could look northeast, you could see the river. So when you went down across that and made its turn and went behind that chicken farm, and back around and came along the graveyard, which you have today. And that would take you down the middle of the street, and then that was where the old trolley tracks used to be.
Yeah.
They're gone now. But I roamed over the Water Gap foundations. On the left-hand side, if you look at it, was the stables. I got 2 horseshoes I found there. Or I got 1 horseshoe there. I found the other horseshoe in front of where the Tinkertown crossing is. I found my first gold piece there. In the back side of the ruins, this is before the Park Service took over. This was back in the 60s. There was a park there. You could go behind them where the ruins were and look at it, because that was a great big round half-moon driveway. But there was a park and steps you could have. There weren't really steps, they were step-offs, like maybe 3 feet landings where you step down. And there was a park there. Now it's all grown up. But the park was there when I was a kid, part of it. And if you walk towards the northeast section of it, towards the river, you go back in there, and there was a couple of overlooks, and you look at that, and they used to call that Sunrise Bluff or something like that, because when the sun came up, it lit everything in gold. Like. Now you come back across that Park Service, and you went to the left side, you walked up the Tattagami side of the mountain, or you went up through where used to be a shale pit. Now also, the foundation's gone now, but it was there a little bit when I was a kid. Right there at the Lake Lenape, there's a tree there. Now I was there a couple of years ago, you got a bench. But before that, there was a little foundation where there was a shack there. And the shack, I believe, was part of the canoes that they rented, because the canoes was always on that lake. The lake was bigger and much more pristine, much better. So I assumed that, because I walked around there trying to find something. But that's gone now, it's gone now. So is the canoes, and so is the gazebo. The gazebo over in the back, when you went across this way to the mountain, and you walked the trail, and it was crowded, and fronds and all that stuff. And you walk along there, and you come to the gazebo. Now on the other side of the gazebo was where Mincy Trails was, and also where Diana's Bath came down towards where Wolf Hollow is now. And Diana's Bath and the falls and that section's off in the backside. Now it's all changed today because they made it a walking trail, so to speak. But at the top of it, I used to go to the fire tower during the fire season. I played hooky, I go up there. Up at the top of the fire tower on towards the Tots side gap, there's a road. Actually, it was all marshy and wet up there. It's like a swamp. And that would come down and feed the Diana's Path and the Diana's Trail. And if you're closer to the Wolf Hollow golf course, there was another little trail there that would come down too. That was part of it too. But I spent a lot of my time on the front side because John made us clean the gazebos. So we had, I want to say 3, maybe 2, but they were lookouts. You went up the Tannery, and then they were outlooks, gazebo roof. You walk, you sit and you look out and you see the river. And then we went up and policed the area very much. No, there wasn't hardly any paper. But I wish today, because I would go up there and sit, I could do it myself. And I'd go up there and sit on that, I call it the gazebo, whatever you want to call it. And there's so much history there. When I looked at it, I'm thinking, even today, I'm saying to myself, why didn't people save this? Because there was so many initials. People put down, I'm from New York, or I'm from New Mexico. This is my name. So-and-so, initials. And they were all carved up there in that ceiling along the sides and in the benches. That's history. To me, that's history. That you could touch and feel the essence. I mean, when I sat there, I wished they had saved that. I don't know what they did with them when they tore them down. But each one had that. And we walk up the trail. Now, there was 3 ways actually. You get up to the fire tower. And you can walk along the edge, walk along the mountain and look out and see the river. Actually, there's 4 ways. The other way, nobody can go. I went that way. But anyway, you go up that way, or you can walk up the Meadows power line. Follow that. Or you can go over to Wolf Hollow and come up Diana's Bath side. Or, and I did this by myself, and it's gone. You would go down the Point of the Gap, where it used to be Cold Air Cave. They had all the restaurants and all that kind of stuff. It's gone now. Now it's a parking lot. But below that, about a couple thousand yards on the right-hand side was a Quonset hut. An old man lived in there. I would walk down in there and talk to him. I talked to everybody. It's a Quonset place. I went down there one time a couple of years ago. I can't even find the foundation. But anyway, behind this Quonset hut was a deer trail. Very hard. But I walked up that deer trail on the back side of the mountain, on the Mount Bethel side, and come up the side behind the fire tower.
Must have been steep. That's very steep.
Extremely steep. And I pretend that I was a mountain climber. I'm a goat. I don't know how many times I slipped and fell this way or that way. I'd traverse the surface. I'd walk along the side and walk along the side. I started, I couldn't go back, so I kept going. And I finally got up to the fire. And I used to go up to the fire tower and talk to the old man up there. And he'd get them in there and he'd say to me, you're supposed to be in school. I said, well, we got a half a day today. But I would climb the tower up there when they had the fire season. They had a log cabin there, a place where you had a car. Now there's several ways you could get there. There was a road that would take you out along Tots Gap and bring you down the Tots Gap Road, which would take you down to the Cherry Valley Road, actually. But today you can't drive back in there. I think probably just four-wheeler would get back in there, because that would take you along where they have the beacons, and the beacons were for airplanes. So that was the road signs as the planes would fly. That was they get there and they stay on line when they're going west. As when I worked for Med-Ed, we used to go in there and check the power once in a while. You could get in there. I don't think you can walk in there today. But there you drove along that road, and then you come into where the fire tower was. And like I say, there was three good ways to get into the fire tower, and that one way up the backside. Well, nobody wants to go that way. I don't even know why I did. But anyway, I went up there. And I would walk out, and then I walked down Tots Gap Road. And then when you come down to Tots Gap, you would come to the road that would go to, Valley Road. Or you could cut through the trails and come back behind Wolf Hollow. Mm-hmm. And that's where the golf course was.
Yeah, I know those trails.
Yeah, you can go back in, come right across there. So there's a lot of ways of getting around these places. And I slept in the old gazebo on Lake Lenape. And I slept in a bear cave, only because it's raining, pouring down rain. It's cold, late at night. I couldn't find my way around without falling down and breaking my leg. I think I was 11. Nobody cared whether I came home or not. So I crawled in a bear cave. And I look back at that and I'm thinking to myself, well, you gotta be a dummy. There could have been a bear in there. Or I could have crawled into a rattlesnake nest. But I went in there and curled up and went to sleep. I had my Mary Jane, had my little snack.
So you're still living in Water Gap at that time?
I was living in Water Gap and still the hot rod. So then when I graduated from the school, I went to Stroudsburg 1 month, just long enough to learn the alma mater. And then we moved to East Stroudsburg. And then I went into the plaza and all this stuff. I went for Carmella's. I worked Carmella's when I was 15. I went to the J.M. Hill School, three years. And when I turned 17, I hitchhiked to Easton, fully intending to join the Marines. He wasn't there. I wound up in the Navy. But Analomink, I did forget about Marshall's Creek. I lived in Marshall's Creek too, Craig's Meadows, up where the Kings Pond is. When you went back up the Kings Pond Road, which is today's all full of houses, there was a big white house there. A German lady ran it. Next to it was a red cottage. And then when you got to that cottage, the road stopped, and it was all dirt. And you'd walk that dirt road through the woods till you got to the right side was Kings Pond. And then I walked that dirt road all the way to Hamlin's Airport and go down and watch the airplanes land. Today, it's all built up. That was a dirt road. That's all just a wagon road, nothing else.
So at the age of 17, you joined the Navy.
Joined the Navy.
And then you left Monroe County.
I left the county and I came back. And that's when I came back at 19. Well, at 19, I met my to-be wife. 21, I was on fire. January of 1959 to the end of 59 was a terrible, terrible year for me. I was on fire until I was in the hospital until around May. I came home, I didn't have no job, didn't have no girl, no place to live. I slept in my car, didn't have any jobs. Friends of mine would take me home for supper. So that year was a terrible, terrible year. I was a blade of grass blowing in the wind, didn't know which way to go. I was completely convoluted. I was just relying on, actually nothing, really. My girl, well, that's the divine revelation. I mean, I met her when I was 19, she was 17. So we went together. She broke the engagement because she wanted to date other guys. So I didn't have nothing. Slept in a car. Until I got the job as a police officer. You know, when I got the job, I worked at Ronson for 1 month, couldn't stand that. Then I used to work at Schneidman's, which was a gas station on Lower Main, which is where KFC is now today. And I would, on Saturdays, I'd wash cars or pump gas, just to get my gas money for my car. And that's how it was in that particular time, that time frame, when I was 20. I was 22.
So this is late 50s, early 60s, something like that.
1959, 1960, I got married. 1959, I joined the police force. All the people that was on the force in 1959, in my time, they're all gone. I'm the only one left. Everyone else is gone. McDonald's gone. Cease is gone. Quick is gone. They're all gone. Everyone is quit. Just me.
But you didn't stay in Monroe County, if I remember your story correctly.
I stayed in Monroe County. Yeah, I've been in Monroe County from 1959 when I came out of the Navy, and I never went anywhere else.
What about the 3 Mile Island?
Well, 3 Mile Island was, I guess it was a lark, you might say. There's time. It depends upon the person, I believe. Now, the company was in bad shape. They had this tremendous incident at the island, which in reality, somebody thought of this and they did a good job. Because I was a first-class lineman then. Highly trained, you have to be in order to save your life or you die. You climb the poles, you ride a bucket, you're handling anything from lightning to high as 13,000, 19,000 volts in your hand. 120,000, 240,000 makes your hair stand. One slip, you're climbing 200 feet into steel towers, freehand. One slip on that tower and you're dead. You climb it in wintertime in ice, you take a hammer and break the ice off. And you better be good, because if you make one slip, you're out of luck. So what happened with 3 Mile? And they had their problem, which to their credit. They needed people to come in and de-escalate the problem and also decontaminate it. Get people to go into the destroyed sections. And the best people to do that was the highly trained linemen, because it was a simple factor to equate the two. You went in there, if you're working high voltage, you got rubber gloves and sleeves, you got safety. You went into the island, you got all kinds of gear on you, gloves, sleeves, same analogy. The only thing is, you got radiation, you got heat problem. So it meshed together in that particular area. So I volunteered to go out because I thought it was a good thing to help save the company. Because I liked the company.
I didn't realize that you were living here when that story took place.
Yeah, I liked my job. My job was the best job I ever had in my life. That was the greatest one. I was 30 years of that, and I would do it again. And I've climbed poles, I've climbed towers, I've had all kinds of stuff in my hands, and you name it. And when I went into the island, for some reason or other, again, my work ethic and the foreman, you're only supposed to make one entry. Perhaps I was making 2 entries a day. And I asked him about that. He said, well, you're the only guy I can trust. I said, you're burning me out. I'm only allowed to get so much radiation. And the funny part about that, 40-some years later, 42, 43, they never followed up on find out just how our people survived this radiation conflict. They've done a lot of things with normal people in the towns, we'll say Middletown, or people that were pregnant. You know, they did studies on that, but they didn't study the actual worker. They never come back with any kinds. They never said. We was in that one incident in there on a Saturday, and I had 6 guys with me, 5 of us, another 6. We made this entry, and my particulate mass was about the size of that. You're only getting about 70% air very difficult to breathe through this charcoal. And you only had a little glass. And I'm in there and I got a strange odor in my nose and down through my throat, and I didn't like it. First time I ever was in an entry and got this, and it went through my particulate mask. When I went through my charcoal, that bothered me. So I had radio communication, and I aborted the mission. Stopped it. I said, because I checked with some of the other guys, and they were still getting the same smell. I said, there's something in here weird. This isn't right. Something, I don't know what it is. Could be anything. So they kept us there. And then they sent the Hershey medical team over in an ambulance. They backed up to the dock, and they hauled us all over to the Hershey Medical Center. And we sat, there's in the paper, I have a paper someplace. And we sat there all day and didn't know what to do with us. They didn't know what to do with us. To this day, I don't know what it was, and I don't know what, and they didn't tell us anything. And I don't know, I have no idea what it was. They never followed up, they just monitored us. We laid over there and we sat there the whole day on that Saturday. And then we came back, took a day off, I came home, we came back again because we recycled, and I made my more entries. I made an entry in there with air packs because it went into a laboratory and it was full of hydrochloric gas. And I had to get in there and secure the drain because somebody had dropped a beaker into the water and it caused fumes to come up. Hydrochloric acid in water doesn't equate. So the whole lab was contaminated. And the only way I could get in there was with power, with air pack, and a high pressure fan at the door, blow everything out. I run in and shut it down, locked it up, and there I am. I had to secure that. I had to get a squeegee, I had to get some water, I had to get it down that drain, then I had to secure the drain. I had to pick up the glass without cutting my gloves. I had to secure the glass, get the glass secured. Now I'm doing all this on an air pack that don't take that much time. And then I had to secure this by putting the canvas over and duct tape it down and then put a barrel over the damn thing. And then I ran out of air. So I had about a minute left, I guess. So luckily I got the glass secured, I got everything down the drain, I secured the drain, and I came out and I was absolutely empty. I was beat. I came out into a clean area, sweat, I was sweating like a horse, peeled everything off. And that was one of the things. I was also credited with saving 2 men's lives. I don't know if it did or not, but it did.
Now these stories are in these, we should mention, you've written 2 books.
Oh, it's in the book.
And I know one copy's at the Monroe County
It's in that one.
Library and you gave us.
Is it up there? I didn't know it was up there.
Yeah.
They got it up there?
Well, I think you told me it was up
Well, I
there.
thought that they took it. I'm not sure if they took it or not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's supposed
Anyway,
to be.
you-
Oh, the first one's up there. I don't know about the second one.
Well, no, the first one, right. So where I'm heading is that you've lived a pretty fascinating life. You've done a lot of things, and we're just scratching the surface here. But people that are interested might want to look up these books. That's what I'm saying.
Well, they would do better if they looked at my second book. I wasn't going to write the second book, but the second book, I left out a lot. But the second book was dedicated to my wife. Because without her, I wouldn't have done anything. She was the one that nurtured me. She was the one that comforted me. She was the one that was keeping me on a steady, straight mind-wise. Because all the stuff that I've gone through could mess your mind up if you don't look at it in proper context. You know, you have to take each concept as it is. You take each job. And again, I'm a third party looking at each job.
Mm-hmm.
If I was totally involved probably in the job, I probably wouldn't have done it. I mean, it could have scared you. But I was outside of the job. Don't ask me how I got into this, because I don't know myself. But I was easily sit down, and a lot of guys would get upset, and I'd say, no, don't do that. And they'd say, well, that's what we got. No, we're not going to do that, because I've told people thousands of times, you have to go by the rule. Every action has a reaction. You push A, you better know where B is going to happen, or you're going to come back and bite you in the butt. So you've got to study A down the line. If I push A, this is going to result to this. So you got to analyze that situation. Everything you do, you got to analyze before you do it. If you don't do it, you might get lucky, and the pieces might gel. But again, you might get not lucky, and one don't fit, and then you got a handful. And then you got to back up and see if you can put them back together again. All my life I've been very analytical, very historical, and I analyze every move that I make before I make the move. When I almost killed a 13-year-old, and I don't know why I stopped, I was ounces, seconds away from pulling the trigger. And I would have been vindicated, but I wouldn't be here today because I wouldn't be able to handle it. But for his sort, he put his rifle down, gun down, and I handcuffed him and threw him in the car. But it is a humbling thing, and I tell you, when I went home, I didn't even tell my wife. I had to wrestle that again with my mind, like I did when I was in isolation. And I went into the room, and I sit there, and I go over the whole event, and I say, that was luck, or that was dumb, or that was stupid, or why? So you analyze it again, and hopefully you learn from it. Every time you do something, you learn from it.
Okay, so you are a lifelong resident, except for those couple of years in the Navy.
Yeah, I've been.
So how do you see the county has changed?
How do I see this what?
The change. What changes do you see over the big changes in Monroe County?
Well, it went from a quaint, bucolic farm area to a bedroom community. And the bedroom community has, it started in the 60s. And the bedroom community has poisoned the bucolic nature of this town. In my day, Stroudsburg was the business center. East Stroudsburg was the industrial center. And the only thing that separated them was the bridge. But they meshed together as one. I've written that, I think. You would come over, and we used to tease them. Stroudsburg had the girls, East Stroudsburg had the boys. And I know they had the girls because I married one. But they meshed together as one unit. So you would come over here during the holidays, it was like magic. All the stores were decorated. You had trains running around a tree in there. And the people would buy here in the business district because it was the county seat, and that's where all the business was. You had the White Cops and Sears, you had Penny's, you had Woolworths, you had Monkey Wards, you had all these buildings. Where over in East Stroudsburg, you had the railroad station, and you had all the plants, and all the people was working there. So it all came together as one unit. Today it's not. Today it's fractured. Since I look at it, when that state bridge got wiped out by the 55 flood, that wiped out the county. When that bridge was wiped out, that was the link that wiped out the county completely. We changed it last month. That was the axe, so to speak, that split the wood.
Well,
so we separated.
A bridge was rebuilt there.
That don't count. That bridge there is just nothing but a piece of concrete. The other one was made of steel. Big difference. I used to walk across the top of that bridge. I used to do the same thing on the railroad bridge, one of our Prospect Street. Us kids, we used to I had a friend of mine ride a bicycle across the top. Now you talk about being crazy. We used to go up top of that bridge, climb out onto the scaffolding, and look down the car. And the funny part about that, when we came from Stroudsburg, us Eastburgers, when we walked into Eastburg, we'd wipe our feet. And not only that, on the left-hand side of the Stroudsburg side was a garage, but next to that was the Philadelphia restaurant. Not many people knew the Philadelphia restaurant was there. There was a restaurant there. And on the other side of that was where Mesco's is. That was a Hudson Garage. And next, between the two buildings, between the A.M. Price building and the Mesco's Grasses, that was Dean Phipps' auto store. Dean Phipps then moved over to Stroudsburg, over on around 8th Street section, in that section. That was Dean Phipps. And the guy that ran Dean Phipps used to live in Water Gap, right next to the Methodist Church. Guy went to school with his son. But these are all these things in my life. All these things come together in one string, and when you separate string, everything actually changed. So yeah, like I said, I've seen people that would talk about their lives, but it's compartmentalized in just that particular little area they was at. Where in my case, and I'm not trying to be some kind of guy that's special, mine didn't never have a compartmentalization. It was scattered. I was a kaleidoscope, a scattergun. You name it, I was there. And I was there several times. And I lived different ways. And again, I walked by myself. I was places nobody went. I climbed trees, I climbed woods, nobody would go back in there. You had to be a knucklehead. But back in the Water Gap, you go back in the Water Gap, I spent one summer, which I loved, down at the Cherry Valley Riding Stables. Now you can't even find that today. And and then the Cherry Creek was bigger than it is today. And there used to be a little water wheel where they park the trolleys at today. There was the parts of a water wheel. The wheel wasn't there, but there was a concrete. That was a water wheel that was in the Cherry Valley part of the Glenwood. And if you went on down further, there used to be a little log-like bridge across that creek. Take you over behind old man Decker's house. Old man Decker lived around the corner. He was a cop there. But then there was an archery course down there where the guys would come down from Glenwood and they'd shoot at an archery target. Us kids would try and go find the arrows if they missed the target was under the ground. And one summer, the people who owned the Glenwood, they took us up there where the field is, and we got on our hands and knees in a big line, and we plucked out the dandelions. He gave us $1. I don't know why they did that, but we did that whole field peeling the dandelions. But those are the days of my day. And then, like I said, Heitler's used to be there. That's gone. Or the pie place is, that's gone. Right there on the corner today, that building's still there, and you might even see some. That was a furniture store. Where the Pizza Hut now, that used to be a gas station. That was Carlton's. And then when you went to Oak Street, on there, that was the bottom of the Fox. Today it's Sycamore. I climbed that sycamore tree, big tree back there. Yeah. And there's a trail. We'd come back behind that, take you down into the other side of Cherry Creek. And if you went a little bit further, there was a big pond. And then when you looked across the pond, there was the house and then the barn. And this is where the horses were. And then you went a dirt road. All that was cornfields. All the way from there to Paper Mill Road was cornfields. And then you went back, there was a house tucked up against the side of the railroad tracks back there. Was an old guy and his wife, old people. I used to go back there, nice people. But he would plow the field with a pair of horses. And he always told me, this is the best way to plow a field because the tractors don't do well. He said, when these horses have take a crap, he says, that's fertilizer. And I would ride my horse, and we get the chance to ride the horses after we took care of them, we took care. And I had an old horse, a beautiful horse, and I'd ride bareback. I never rode with a saddle. And I'd ride back there and I'd stop, about that long, I'm giving a good gallop, giving her a workout. About there's where I want to stop and let the horse walk a little bit. And I always stopped there and talked to the old people. And his wife always had to give me iced tea. And they were lonely, and they needed somebody to talk. I'm a kid, 11, maybe 12. And I would sit and listen, and then they'd talk to me. And then I'd get share an ear coin, do that. Or if I had an apple in my pocket or a sugar cube, I would go down along the tracks and ride over to the Tinkertown crossing, where the Crowsdale Manor is. Across from the Crowsdale Manor, which you can't even see today. The Crowsdale Manor across there was where, actually the Crowsdale Manor is where the stagecoach used to stop. And right across the street from that was a barn, and that's where the stables was. The barn is gone, but there was parts of the barn foundation. That's where I found my second horseshoe. I still got that.
Did you ever meet Mr. Crowsdale, Howard Crowsdale?
Crowsdale in my day, they used to scare us kids because he told us that's where they made Frankenstein.
That's where they made
Frankenstein.
Really? That
was a lab. That was Frankenstein lab. And you could see that. And the funny part about that, when you came across Tinkertown Crossing, which is terrible today, you would go across Tinkertown Crossing and you go by Crowsdale, which was closer than it is now. And you go on down to where Foxtown Hill is, and you know where they have the canoes at and that stuff today? That's where that road came out, behind the canoes. It would come out, around, come back into where Heitner's is now. It didn't go this way. And when you went this way down, and you went maybe, I want to say a half a block, maybe a block. I'll never forget it because I always liked it. In the summertime, there was trees lined up on both sides, and the lane was just single lane. And when the foliage came out, they closed over, and it was like going in a covered bridge. It was that beautiful. And that would take you down behind where the gas station is and come out around the buildings and come back out and swing around again to the right, the left hand to the riding stable, and then on into the Water Gap proper, where the Cherry Creek was much bigger then. And then you'd swing up and go up through the town, which you come to Sycamore today, on the corner of Cherry Valley Road was a grocery store, and right next to them was Gordon Acres right there. And on back that road, Cherry Valley, was the Jennings. They lived back in there. On up further was there was Beth Kewen, which I see now and then on Facebook. She lived up there by her house is gone now, but she lived up there by Mincy. If you went in where the parking lot is now for the Lake Lenape and went that's an old dirt road, and you went up there and you went that towards the Gap water Wolf Hall. Right there's where her house was. She was a shoemaker. Her father used to run the AMP in East Stroudsburg. Fred Shoemaker. Yeah. I remember Fred and I remember Beth. Beth is about, I want to think Beth's a year older than I am, but she lived right there in that corner. And I used to talk to Beth, and she says, Richard, I don't remember half of what you remember. I said, Beth, you lived there. You lived right there behind Lake Lenape. Yeah, you should remember this. Well, I knew her. She had a cousin named Priscilla. Then there was, as you went by that towards Shepherd's Avenue, that was all fields. There wasn't any houses there. There was the Funk family lived over there. Then there was the Kitchens. I mean, I know just about everybody. The Storms, the Redjicks, you name somebody down there I don't know. And I'll tell you where they used to live. But that's just me. I don't understand myself, so I don't expect anybody else to understand me. I sometimes sit alone, and now that she's gone, and I just wonder how my life became my life. Why? I didn't plan any of this. I was just there at the head of the line. There was nothing, and I can swear to God, I never made one plan in my entire life to do what I wanted to do.
Well, you've lived a pretty fascinating life. I mean, you've done some things most people don't do the things that you've done.
I was like a rock in a rivulet of water, just rolling on. I always tell people, and I've told people hundreds of times, to me, life was one big giant pinball machine, and I was being batted around by the hammer. And sooner or later, I fell in a hole. That was it. And that's how it is, life. Yeah. I look at life, and I look back at my life, and people, I've talked to other people, and they got their own human analogy of what I am or am not, and but that's up to them. They decide what they want. I know what I am. I know what I did. I know where I went, and it amazes me even when I look back and I say, "How did you get there? I mean, and why?" Well, in the hurricane in the Bermuda Triangle, I was the only one above decks, and I was going out to sea. The ship, I got a model of my ship about that big. It's a museum quality model. Probably cost about $3,000. But I have this model on this in the aft crane, the boat crane. I have it turned facing the bow. I was standing 50 feet up on this crane, the only one above decks. And my ship was over 500 some feet long. And I watched the bow go underwater and come up to the crane. And then I watched it turn to the side. And it hung there. And then when the stern came out, the screws, they're beating air, and the whole ship vibrated. And then you had expansion plates, sound like blue ox up there and Big Bunyan hitting the damn thing with a hammer. And then she rolled to the left, I don't know which we rolled to port, and I slid out across an oily deck. And the only thing that stopped me from going out and the rest of it was my right hand caught a chain. Otherwise, I'd been out in the ocean. She'd righted itself back up. And we survived the hurricane. But that was, to me, it was just a lark. Didn't pay no attention. I came down off the crane, the chief said, we went into the boat deck house. I'll never forget, he said, son, he said, I thought I lost you there for a minute. I said, I thought you did too. We didn't have no radio communication. Everything was hand signal. And he said, how about a cup of coffee? I said, only if you have a straw. I said, that coffee you got there is going all over the place. So, and I questioned that. I said, what? The captain wants me to take the crane out of this running position, which is enormous, and then you want me to turn it so it's perpendicular to the ship, which is going to put more weight on it. And that crane had lost itself one time and kind of off its rollers. I said, there's a chance that crane's going to topple. and you want me to bring it out and pick up a boat that you can't do anything with. How are you you can't put a boat over the side, the ship's gonna crash, gonna break up. And Chase said to me, son, you're in the Navy, orders are orders. I said, you gotta be crazy. I went to the phone, called the phone, get power to the crane, talked to the guys down below decks. He said to me, Rich, is this you? I said, yeah. He said, what are you doing? I said, I have no idea. He said, you want me to put power to the crane? I said, yes. He said, you gotta be crazy. I said, I know that, but orders are orders. So I climbed the crane. It was a daunting time, so to speak, but I'm a young kid too, so it didn't bother me.
Well, Rich, we've been here a long time, and it's
and I don't
fascinating.
And I talk too much.
Well, no, it's fascinating stuff. But are there any things that you think we should have talked about that would help people who want to understand the history of Monroe County better? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. Maybe there's not, but is there anything else that you think we should mention?
About the county? Well, you're getting into the political side, which you have to get into if you're going to talk about the county. The county's political equation is convoluted, so to speak. And then you're going to have to take the county and equate it to the state, and the state to the federal. Now, today, in my opinion, I don't like what I see. And I tell people this, I tell many people, I came from what I call the silent generation. The silent generation is the last of the Depression babies. We are the last of the Depression babies. And the silent generation was always predicated on the very simple thing they always told us as a kid. Children are to be seen and not heard. That's why we're the silent generation. We were silent back there. We were seen, we didn't say anything. And that's our mantra. That's what we got to live with. My generation has seen the best this country's ever going to see. You're not going to see what we saw. And the only reason you're not going to see that, for a lot of reasons, the explosion of population, the black foot of concrete eating its way through the world. It's wiping out farms. It's wiping out people. People today do not talk to each other because they got a handheld device and a bunch of this. They'll sit there next to each other. In my day, when you visited on Sunday, and again, Sundays was a day off. You didn't have the blue laws. I mean, you had the blue laws, but nobody worked. The only place open on Sunday was maybe the drugstore in an emergency. Everything else was shut down. So that means everybody got together. You could walk the streets. People sit on the porch, tip their hats, wave it, invite you in, have a cup of tea, have a cup of wine, sit down, play a game of checkers. That was communication. And the point of it is, what we have today, communication, in my opinion, is ridiculous. Because, again, we go back to my time, I look at things, radio, in my opinion, was the greatest media we could have ever had back in my time. Only because media, the radio media, when you sit down, and we always had multitude of shows on radio, people talking to shows, Lone Ranger, this kind of stuff, all this. And you had a whole page full of stuff. Everybody that sat down in front of the radio, and we did, we all sit and listen to the war news, we listened to Cronkite, we listened to the radio shows, and Fibber, McGee, and Molly, and all this kind of stuff. And I think this is the greatest thing that ever, and they don't do it no more, it's gone. Because the radio stimulated the mind's imagination. And again, we'll go back to the mind. Everybody had their own stage. Everybody saw what they were being told in a different manner. Today, we lost the vision, we lost the communication with the radio, with the imagination, and we supplanted it with the visualization, which was television. Now people don't have to think, all they got to do is watch. And then we take it one step further, and with our little texting, we not only lost the visualization, now all we can do is talk with our fingers. So this is a route that we're going in this country and this county, which in my opinion is going to lead to a lot of trouble. Because you're a history person. There are 4 times in history that I recall, maybe 5 if you want to think about it, that this country was on the verge of collapsing. Now you know yourself that the dynasty only lasts probably 250, 260 years. But there was 4 times in this country that I recall that I read, what have you. One was the Revolution to begin with. The next one was the Civil War. The next one was World War I. The next one was World War II. They were on, and then if you want to add in the fifth one, if you want to, was the Bay of Pigs debacle with Kennedy when he put the blockade up. Those are the closest things. And if you want to add in the endemic of 1918, that's how close things were to tied in with this pandemic. Those were, in my opinion, that's just my opinion, it just belongs to me, were the 4 or 5 close parts that we've come to destroy in this country, one way or the other. Now we're at the 6th one, where we got one party that wants to destroy the other party, and they're sitting here like children, throwing rocks at each other while the country is floundering. What's going to eat this country up is the climate. Next 20, 30 years, you're going to have temperatures of 125 to 130 degrees out there. Look at the West, it's on fire now. There was a saying back in my day, the world was destroyed by flood. The next time the world's going to be destroyed, it's going to be destroyed by fire. And I think we're on that path today.
Well, it's a depressing note, but maybe it's a note that we should end on.
You're the boss.
Okay.
I'm just a visitor.
All right, well, thanks very much. That was fascinating. I'm going to turn this off.